cover off. So you do that by moving these L screws to the 90 position and then taking the window off. Thank you for joining us for today's live Q&A. We've got Nina here who's recently joined the hive. She hasn't done any beekeeping before and this will be her first experience harvesting the Flow Hive. So it's sometimes nice to start with a complete beginner because she'll be there going, what do I do, what do I do? And that's often useful to those of you out there who are getting started with your Flow Hives. If you've got questions, put it in the comments below. We've had an explosion over the weekend with questions. We had a video take off viral with 10 million views and so on. And we've got an influx of new questions from beekeepers all around the world. So we're going to try and answer your questions and also just show you how the Flow Hive harvests. So first of all, you have a look and you try and identify what's going on in your hive. Now we've got a little technical problem. Just give us a thumbs up if you can hear the audio okay.
I can barely hear you. Could you pull out?
Okay, so we're live streaming here, so bear with us. And what we're going to do is just adjust this audio a little bit. Okay, 1, 2. Give us a thumbs up if that's better. See if you can hear us now. Okay, good. So what we're going to do is harvest a little honey while we answer your questions. So no such thing as a silly question. Chime in, let us know what you would like us to answer and if you've got any questions relevant to the Flow Hives or beekeeping in general. Okay, we're back online. Thanks for your patience. Now, Nina up here, Nina's never done this before. So there's a little key access cover and you can take that out just by pulling it out here like that. And now what you're trying to do is gauge the presence of honey in the hive and whether you can harvest or not. So this window tells a story, and also the side window that you already took off tells a story. And between the two we can often get a great idea of if it's time to harvest or not. So this is my father and I's invention that we worked on for a decade and brought to the world 8 years ago. And it's amazing, we're still finding people and beekeepers that haven't heard of it before. So we're here to answer your questions. Now this frame here, see how it hasn't got much honey in it?
Yep.
And if we go across, this next one's got more honey in it. You can see the cross section here. But I'm already seeing that this hive isn't completely full. But if I have a look at the hive window, on the side window, you can see the beautiful capping beneath their feet. The capping's what they put on top of the cells when the water content is low enough and they want to preserve that honey. So the bees have done their amazing work on our flow frames, which is our invention, to cover them all in wax, join the parts together, dewater the nectar, and finally cap it off. So we can tell that honey in this frame is actually ready even though it doesn't quite look like it in the end frame here. So what we're going to do is take out this little cap at the bottom and the one at the top, and that gives us access to these areas. Then you insert the tube into the bottom. Now it's got a little tongue on it for a reason, and that unblocks this little leak back point. Actually, when it's in there, it blocks it, so no honey drains into the hive, but when you pull it out, any remaining dribbles go back into the hive for the bees to reuse. So what you want to do is wiggle that in, so that tongue goes into that lower area. That's it, perfect. These are all little refinements we did in the last few years leading up to taking it to the world when we realised, oh, honey's building up, we need a way for it to go back into the hive. So you've got your jar there. Now, this key goes in the top. Now there's 2 slots at the top, it goes in the bottom one. What you want to do is lift those parts. So you can do it by just putting the key in part way and hold the key down the end to give yourself a bit more leverage. Now, that's it, beautiful, perfect. And what that's done is created channels in the comb like this. So the parts were like that, and then they've moved like that. Now the honey can flow down and out. You can see it coming out already.
Can you take the key out?
You can go back to a 90 and put it in a bit further now, because we may as well crack the rest of the frame. If you only want a little bit of honey, you can just harvest a bit like that, or you can harvest the whole frame. Beautiful. And now back to a 90 again, all the way to the back till you feel it stop. And there we go. Beautiful. So now the whole frame is opened up into channels. And you may as well leave it in there just in case the parts are sticky with propolis and not quite lifting straight away. But look at that, beautiful honey flowing out.
Amazing.
First harvest, well done Nina. So if you've got questions, put it in the comments and we'll answer those as this beautiful golden liquid flows directly out of the hive. Now, some people are writing in saying this can't be true, it's CGI, which is what we got in the beginning when we first launched on crowdfunding. There was a big stir. We ended up with an amazing amount of viral traction in the beginning, and we ended up with $12.2 million US of sales in the first 8 weeks. So it was a whirlwind of a launch, going from the shed where we were just tinkering away on the smell of an oily rag to this experience where we had to suddenly grow up fast and bring that product to the world. There we go. And thank you to anyone who's listening who was in that original crowdfunding. It was amazing to have your support. So I just wanted to show you the bees. There's bees in the window here. Now the honey's draining out from beneath their feet, and you can have a look. Some of the capping's perfectly intact. In other spots it's just fissured a little bit. And that's typical. The bees have hardly noticed something's changed, but the honey's draining out from beneath their feet. And if we go to the landing board, you can see the bees going in and out as they normally do. So we achieved our goal of hardly disturbing the bees and being able to drain the honey out in a simple, easy way. Any questions coming through?
Yeah, a comment from Philip saying that honey looks so gorgeous, I wish I had a biscuit for it.
Nice.
Brooke's in Norfolk Island, and they're aerial spraying fipronil for ant control. Do you think that's a danger for the bees?
Yes, absolutely. So we live in a world where an amazing amount of insecticide is sprayed onto the Earth's surface. I think 1 billion litres a year or something ridiculous like that. And it's a big problem for the bees, and it's up to us as beekeepers, and it's fantastic that the plight of the bee is becoming mainstream now, and we all agree we need to look after the bees. And one of the things we need to do is stop spraying insecticides. So good idea to start campaigning against that, because you really don't want fipronil landing on flowers. If it lands on flowers, the bees are going to go and suck on that and die because it's an insecticide. So yeah, it's one of the amazing things about Flow Hive, and something that keeps us really going, is the way that people engage with the bees and then start sticking up for the bees and write back saying, I've turned my whole block into an insecticide-free zone. Super important work to do in the world in order to reduce the amount of species going extinct. We're here looking after the European honeybees, but in doing so, sticking up for them, we're also looking after the 20,000 native bee species that exist in the world as well, that need to forage on safe flowers without chemicals on them.
Thanks, Cedar. Couple of people asking on YouTube, actually, wondering, they'd love to be able to look inside the brood box. Would it be a bad idea to have a window in your brood box, or is it too much light for the bees?
It's something that does get requested, so thanks for your feature request there. And keep the feature requests coming. So the suggestion is we have a window like this in the brood, so we can look into the brood chamber and see what's going on there.
Fantastic. Arnold's wondering, is the background noise cicadas?
It is.
It is, isn't it?
Here in a hot, sweaty summer on the east coast of Australia, the cicadas sometimes get so loud we can't hear ourselves think. It's not too bad today.
Jake's tuning in, YouTube. Is there a way to control a hive size for urban beekeeping?
So this is about as small as you want to go. This is a typical beehive. You've got your brood box down here and a honey collecting box on top. Some people add another brood box or another super. Some people stack them 7 boxes high. But you can't go much smaller. But the great thing is, it's not a huge footprint. If you have a look at how much area this takes up, it's not a huge amount of space in your yard, yet you can get a real amount of beautiful produce from it that you can share with your neighbourhood. Now, what's happening is the bees are going to forage on 6 to 10 kilometre radius, right? They're taking off from the hive, they're going out, they're collecting all that nectar and they're bringing it back into your hive to create this beautiful honey. So one of the beautiful things about beekeeping is you can be a farmer, you can look after animals and keep bees in a very small area, in urban backyards, on rooftops, even in balconies, in high rises. People keep bees. So that's one of the wonderful things.
Fantastic. Jennifer's tuning in from Wisconsin in the US and saying that their honey will usually crystallise over the winter in the classic hives for bees. Just wondering if it would be the similar thing with a flow hive.
So you can get some crystallisation sometimes, and I purposefully made it happen just to test it when we were inventing the flow hive. So what we did is we took out some edge frames of honey that we knew would crystallise earlier, because each type of honey has different crystallisation rate, and the paper bark down here crystallises very easy, sometimes in the hive. So we actually took out the edge frames and put them in the fridge to really cool down, crystallise, and put them back in to get that crystallised honey forming in the frames. And what we found is when it's partially crystallised, which can happen in the hive, you get a cloudy honey coming out and sometimes some big sugar crystals left behind in the frame, and the bees will use them so they can just stay for the bees. Now it's a concern that comes up from a lot of people before they start flow hive beekeeping, but we don't hear of it as a problem once they're into it, because what happens is the bees keep the hive quite warm. And it's usually when you pull the frames from the hive and put them in your shed in conventional harvesting that the bulk of the crystallisation happens. And if you do get some crystallised frames up here, then you can simply just leave them for the bees to chew out and replace it with liquid honey when the weather warms up again and the bees get going. We haven't heard of it being
coming in sort of causes the bees to swarm.
So the primary cause of swarming is not enough room for the queen to lay her eggs. Now that can be for a variety of reasons. Perhaps you've got a booming colony and they want to lay more eggs than you've got space for, but usually it's because you've got honey down the bottom here, and if you have a whole lot of honey taking up all the space, it gets called honey bound, then the queen doesn't have anywhere to lay eggs. Now if you keep harvesting honey from the top, which is something that's easier to do with a flow hive than a conventional one, you can just come and harvest a few frames, then you suddenly make space, and the bees can then bring up honey from down the bottom up to the top and make space in your hive again. So a great thing to do in the springtime is harvest honey when you see the frames full, to limit the swarming tendencies of your hive. Now, as to compare one to the other, there really isn't any difference. You can go and do the same things to this hive as you can a conventional hive to limit swarming. Things like taking some frames out of the bottom box and replacing with some new ones will help to give fresh real estate for the queen to lay. You can add another box to the hive to give more space so the hive is less crowded, and that will help. You can split the hive, which is my absolute favourite method, because if you don't want another hive, somebody else surely will, and it really does limit swarming, because all of a sudden you've taken out half the frames out of the brood box and taken them to a new hive. And you've taken away a lot of bees at the same time, and all of a sudden that swarming trigger has gone away.
Great. So, a couple of questions, and I guess we get this a little bit also about when we're harvesting honey. Is it stressing the bees out when we're taking the honey out, and is it disturbing them in any way in those flow frames?
So we get a lot of questions about that, and they're just coming through over the weekend because we've had a viral video with a whole lot of new beekeepers that have never heard about it before. So my father and I put a lot of attention into making sure the bees had the least disturbance possible. And we had to redesign to do that. So I'll go through some of the design things we took into account. And you can see this is the frame we're harvesting, and the bees are just walking as normal on the comb surface while the honey's draining out beneath their feet. Now some of the bees are getting into it. They're starting the process of decapping because they can tell the honey's drained out from beneath their feet, and they're going to rip that capping off, tidy up the cells, rebuild the parts, and the whole process will start again. Capped yet, and there's bees down the cells. Now if we had have made the parts like this so they met each other, then what could happen is it goes like that, not a major problem for the bee, but when it comes back, then a wing or a leg could be caught in the parts. So what we did is we put space there like this, and that means the bees have to bridge this V-shaped gap with wax, and we've got a whole patent about it. And that way when it moves, that wax breaks, this wax breaks, and it comes back, they can't get a leg or a wing caught in there. At worst, they could get it caught in some wax, and the other bees will just help them get out. So that was an important part of design in order to make it as gentle as possible for the bees. And I'm really happy to say far less bees are harmed with this method of harvesting than the conventional method that I used to do. Now I'll show you the flow frame right here. So if I grab this key, this is how it works, and you might get this is what's in the hive in the top box, and the bees coat all of this in wax, and they're partly formed honeycomb cells. And I'll just move it down like that, and I'll see if you can see hexagons there. So get the camera angle right, it's probably going to be a little bit downwards on a 12-degree angle about there. So you should see hexagons. Now if I go, I'm going to put this in halfway, okay? So you'll see what happens. I put it in halfway, and now I'm turning it. Now those cells are turning into channels, and the honey can then drain down through those channels. And this half we haven't harvested yet, and it's still in that hexagon matrix. So that's the way it works. But if you zoom in, you can see what I was talking about earlier with the little gaps between the parts. The cell walls don't actually meet, and that was the important bit for the bee's knees.
Nice. And so what do the bees do with the cappings once you've cracked the frame?
Well, we can have a look at that right now.
Perfect.
So let's see. They're chewing away at it already. This bee in front of my finger is chewing away at the capping. Now what they'll do is they'll recycle it to use it to wax up the frame again and rebuild the parts. So that saves them secreting wax from their wax glands and using up honey to do so. So there's a bit of a savings for the bee, because an incredible, I just saw a little bit fall, so one of them dropped a little bit of wax down. So that can happen too, and you'll see it collecting in your tray down the bottom. But if they don't have to rebuild every time like conventional harvesting, then it's a savings for the bee in terms of there's something like 7 kilograms of honey to produce a kilogram of wax. I recently heard it's actually much higher than that. Look at that beautiful jar of honey. Perfect. So there's some bees down these cells we're harvesting now. And what I want to show you is what happens. They can get caught there because this was empty as we looked at. We decided to harvest the frame anyway because we could see the side. You can actually see some bees there. So what I'm going to do is turn the frame back now, and you can watch, see those bees just pulling right out of the cell. So those 3 that were there and there and there just darted out, and there's still one down here doing something. It might be doing some repair work, but it's going to get out of the cell shortly. There's another one here going in and out. This one's licking away with its tongue. It's fun to zoom in and really see their mop-like tongue licking away at the honey.
So it's a couple of questions. I think some people get a bit confused between the brood box and the super, and thinking maybe that when you're harvesting the honey that you're killing larvae and killing baby bees. That why we have these 2 different boxes and maybe what their roles are in beekeeping.
Okay, great question. So down the bottom here we have a typical Langstroth brood box full of wooden frames like this. So we've got wooden frames and the bees draw their wax out. I like to let them do it perfectly naturally, just hanging their own wax from these comb guides. And that way you don't have to add any foreign wax in from another hive to create that wax foundation that beekeepers often do. When I found out you didn't need to put the foundation in, that was a happy moment, because I was certainly sick of waxing and wiring late at night to put the foundation wax in the frames. And the bees do a great job of drawing out the comb themselves, and we don't need to spin these frames in a centrifuge, so we don't need the wire reinforcing through it either. So it makes it easier, and you've just got that natural thing going on down the bottom with the bees making the cells perfectly sized for them, and creating their brood and their pollen stores and their bee bread and honey stores on the edges of the hive typically. So that's what's down the bottom. Then here we have an excluder in place between these 2 hives, and the excluder is 4.3 millimeter grid pattern, which the queen can't get through, so she can't get up to the top box, right? So therefore she can't lay in the flow frames that have the moving parts. A hive won't always need the excluder, but if you're going to experiment without one, make sure she's not a queen that's going to lay brood in the flow frames.
Fantastic, Seeds. Just a couple of people say my microphone's a little bit quiet. I'm not quite sure why, so maybe I'll just ask you, Seeds, and maybe repeat my question or something. Anyway, any tips for repelling ants?
Any tips for repelling ants? Yes. So what you can do is activate the ant guards. If you've got our Flow Hive 2, 2 Plus, you can use these ant guards down the bottom. Now if you're getting ants that are annoying, they don't really harm the hive or the bees or your honey production. They're just annoying to be unsightly behind all the covers, right? So if you don't like that, you can put some oil in here, wind that back down again, and then the ants will have a barrier. Of course it won't work if you've got foliage pressing up against the hive, because the ants will just use that as a bridge to get past your ant barrier. You can also use a grease, like a white Vaseline in here or under here as well. We've put an area where you can put it, and that'll create a good barrier too. Now, ants are one of those things, they're a bit persistent, and you'll find that, why aren't they gone? I've done my oil. And you'll find they might be living behind this cover up here or under the roof, so you've got to get around and brush them all off a couple of times, and the problem will go away till next time. And next time they're bothering you, you can go and fill up your ant guards again.
Fantastic.
If you don't have them, you can do a makeshift one just by putting the legs or blocks, if you've got the classic, in some tubs of water or something like that. And if you don't want to do that, there's another little trick you can do just by putting some cinnamon powder behind the covers. That will be a deterrent as well.
Right. So how often do you need to check the inside of the hive?
So that's a great question, and it really differs depending on what's going on in your area of the world and also what's going on in your hive. So of course, if you see something going wrong, like the numbers really dropping when you open the windows and you're worried, then get in there and do your brood inspection. Have a look, make sure you've got a laying queen. We've got lots of videos showing you how to do that. But otherwise, if the hive's happy and healthy, then we want to go through and make sure we do a good inspection for pests and disease at least a couple of times a year, going through every frame, checking for things like AFB or EFB, and that's just something you do as a beekeeper. Now, if you've got varroa mite in your area, we don't have it yet, but it's now come to Australian shores and it'll slowly spread, then there'll be management practices that might mean you're getting in there more often. So having a look at your brood and doing mite counts. At the moment, because of the varroa mite, we have to do a alcohol wash once in every 16-week period. So that's increased the amount of times we're in the brood box. So ask your local beekeepers how often they inspect their brood, and that will give you a good idea of how often you'll need to do that. Now, it quickly becomes one of the rewarding things about beekeeping, and some beekeepers after a while go, oh, I don't even care for the honey anymore. I just love working with the bees and looking at their world and learning about what they're doing in the brood box. So if you want to have a look and get inspired and get a handhold, we've got a great online course at thebeekeeper.org, which is made to take you from square one right through to a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping. It's free to try, and it's also a great fundraiser where we've now planted 1.5 million trees to create billions of blossoms for the bees to safely forage on.
Right. So it's a couple of people asking, what are your sort of tips when you're considering choosing a location for your hive? And can you have it like in a unit or on a veranda, or do you have to have a backyard?
People do keep them on balconies in skyscrapers. My sister had hives on her balcony in Berlin for a while. So others keep it on rooftops. But one of the main considerations is proximity of their flight path to people. So when you're situating your hive, you want your bees to fly out the front and get up and away, nice and clear in front if you can. And that way, people are less likely to be bothered by your bees, because if you're walking past here in front, you might get a bee stuck in your hair and then a sting and so on. So what you want to do is think about where people are walking around your yard and make sure that the flight path is going to not bother anyone. There's bees everywhere all the time anyway, in tree hollows, in wall cavities and things, so they're all around in urban landscapes. So you can often find, even in a very small backyard, you can find a spot for it where the bees can get a nice flight path, and your hive will then spread out and bring all of that nectar back to you and create amazing honey from what is a very small footprint.
Yeah, and can you harvest honey wax, harvest wax from the hive, Cedar?
Yes, you can. So here the wax is being recycled. So we're not harvesting wax from this flow frame, but you can harvest conventional honeycomb in frames like this from down the bottom here. So you'll find that there's usually all honey on the edges. You can go and take one of those frames out, cut it up, put it on a cheese platter, keep the wax, make candles with it and all of that. And you can also add another box dedicated for that. So you can simply add another box of frames on top. The bees will get up there, create a lot of wax, comb there, and you can crush and strain and keep that wax. Or under the roof here, you might decide to take the plug out, which is here, and allow the bees to get up into the roof cavity to build some honeycomb. Now, you can let them build honeycomb freeform under the roof, but that's going to get a bit messy when you pull the roof off. So you might like to quarantine them to a smaller area using, say, a Pyrex baking dish, so you can take the lid off and watch them building comb in this area here.
Seeds Taylor's in Sydney in question, and this one's we get asked this one quite a lot. Bought an extra box to prevent their hive from swarming. Just wondering where they should place it, at the bottom or under the current brood box or above the brood box?
Okay, great, good question. So it depends on your strategy. So if you want to treat it as another brood box, then you'll be putting it under your super. So it's either going below this one or above this one, as you say. Now, if you put naturally drawn comb above, up in this box, then what might happen is the bees will come up and they'll start building comb at this level, and then it'll be this free-form wobbly comb. So if you're going to use naturally drawn, i.e. no foundation, then you're better off putting it below, so the bees will hang down and hang their comb nice and straight from the comb guide. If you're using foundation, wax foundation, plastic foundation, then you can put it above, and that will generally keep them straight, although sometimes your foundation wax will fall out of your frame as well, and you've got a bit of a clean-up process there. But if you're using just frames like this with the comb guide, go down the bottom and put your brood box underneath.
Great. Cedar, John's asking, do you have a particular type of bee that you like better, and can you tell the difference between the species?
So there's different breeds of bees and there's different species of bees. So Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, has all of these different breeds that beekeepers will say are the best. So one will be breeding Carnolian bees and they'll say they're the best. Another one will be breeding Italian bees and they'll say that's a great one for beginners. And another one will be breeding Caucasian bees. So there's all these different breeds, and it really doesn't matter, in my opinion. The traits you want to go for are bees that are gentle to work with and fun to have around. So hives that are aggressive, you want to take the queen away and requeen with a mated queen from a breeder that has gentle genetics. That's probably the main thing. Then beyond that, great traits, hygienic, so they look after the hive themselves more so and keep pathogens and pests away. And also honey production, but that one isn't as big as commercial operators need. Commercial operators are after that maximum honey production. We're, as backyard beekeepers, more interested in ones that are gentle to work with and still make honey and look after their hive. Often you'll see quite a number of different breeds in the one hive. You'll see dark bees and light bees, and what that is one bee will have multiple fathers. 30 or 60 or so drones might mate with that one queen on her mating flight, and she'll bring that genetic material back into the hive, and that explains the different colours of bee that you've got in your hive. So it's usually a bit of a mix anyway. So in terms of species of bee, then we have almost 20,000 species of native bees worldwide, and one of my favourites, to answer your question, is the blue-banded bee, which is one we get in this area. We'll put a link below, and it's a bit bigger than the European honeybee. It looks a bit fluffy. It's got these bright blue stripes on its back, on its abdomen. So that's a very cool native bee that we have locally.
It is, I love that, and they seem to love all the blue flowers, and they're always in the garden. They're so beautiful.
They are.
They look like little bandits. Seeds, is there a better time of day to inspect your brood box, like morning, afternoon, weather-wise as well?
Absolutely. The best time to inspect your brood box is when you have less bees. The bees are out busy doing their work foraging. Now, a lot of bees, and we've measured 70,000 bee movements from a hive going in and out, and so a lot of them are out to play, out collecting nectar and foraging, and they've also got work to do. So on a sunny day, mid-morning to mid-afternoon is the best time to do your brood inspections. If it's rainy and windy and cloudy and the bees can't do their work, then they're going to be home looking for something to do, and that might just be defend their colony from a mammal trying to get the honey. So better off inspecting mid-morning to mid-afternoon on a warm, sunny day.
Nice. Seeds, do you ever get stung by bees?
Absolutely. So usually from complacency, the main time I get stung is when I am beekeeping gloveless and I'll put my hand on a bee and it didn't like that, so it'll sting me. So if you look at, I think a couple of Facebook Lives back, I show you pulling out the stinger from my finger. If you don't like getting stings on your hands, then wear your gloves. If you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves. Make sure you're protected in a good bee suit, and that way you'll limit those negative experiences of getting lots of stings when you're just beginning.
Right. Question from Kim, wondering what finish we've put on the hive, because they're trying to find a low VOC finish, but it seems to be only an option for indoor paints and stains.
Yes, so generally beekeepers will paint just outdoor house paint on their hives, and they've done that for years inside and out after dipping the box in chemicals first. So low VOC hasn't conventionally been something that beekeepers have been looking for. What we tend to do is paint the outsides and leave the insides just natural for the bees, and that way we don't have to worry about that VOC issue. If you're painting your roof, use a good outdoor hard-wearing house paint. This is what gets all of the weather right on top, all of the sun, all the debris falling on it, the rain and so on. And you want to keep a good weather seal on top. Now, as far as what we've painted here, now you've caught us with a bit of a shabby one today, but that's okay. I can show you what happens after years. This is a decking product, and we've turned to that because we found the oils attracted mould. So we've gone to the water-based decking products that are made to keep wood looking like wood outdoors for as long as possible. So that's what we put on the cedar wood hives. The Araucaria we paint with a good outdoor house paint, but with the cedar you can get away with a decking coat like this. Now this has been a few years and you can see that it needs a little bit of a rub and a recoat. So it'll be time to do that. If you have a look at this side, it hasn't been copying the sun so much. This is the southern side of the hive and it's still looking very nice there with that decking coat.
Nice. So you were mentioning before about requeening the hive, if it's getting a little bit of aggressive. A future friend from TikTok's asking how long after requeening will the gentle hive sort of start to take over, I suppose?
So if you switch out the queen for a new one, then assuming the queen takes, which most of the time she does, then it'll be enough time for her, she's already mated if you buy one in, or if you let them breed their own, then it'll be another 16-day cycle while they create one. So assuming you've brought in a queen in a little queen cage, then there'll be probably a day or two where the candy block gets chewed away. She'll be released into the hive and she'll immediately start laying eggs. Now for worker brood, it's a 21-day cycle. And so 21 days later, you'll have the new bees starting to mix in with the old bees. And after a while, there's a changeover because bees only live for 4 to 6 weeks. So after that time, all the old bees have died off. So a month or a little bit longer is the time frame you'll be expecting the temperament to change if you requeen your hive.
Nice. Ben's just joined us and wondering, really want to get a beehive in the garden, and they live in the UK. Can hives be set up in wooded areas?
They certainly can. So if you have a choice between a hive in the sun and a hive in the shade, go for the one in the sun because it'll keep pathogens away like chalk brood. Having said that, people do successfully keep their hives in shady wooded areas as well. The absolute best for the bees would be shade in the afternoon in summer and the rest of the time sunny. That way they could do a bit less air conditioning. But they're great at doing air conditioning. They collect water, they do evaporative cooling, and they're able to cool the hive even out here on a hot day like this. We're all sweating here and the bees are fine ventilating their hive and getting the temperature right.
Yeah, I think we need a few thousand bees around us, Seda.
Yes.
It's so hot. How long does it typically take after initially setting up the Flow Hive to be able to harvest your first jar of honey?
Okay, so that really does depend. Some people have amazing luck and they install their bees and within weeks they're harvesting honey because it's springtime and the bees are going berserk and they've got a really strong colony. There's flowers everywhere and they harvest the honey, then 2 weeks later it's all full again, they harvest it again. But that's a pretty dream run. On the other end of the scale, you've got people who start their hive and they don't get any honey that season. Perhaps it was drought, perhaps there was fire, perhaps the colony was weak, but for whatever reason they didn't store an excess honey for us to share too. So we do suggest people keep more than one hive because sometimes you can just get a colony that's a bit slow and the one next to it might be bringing in a lot of honey. Typically though, if you start a hive, it'll be some months, sometimes 6 months or so, before you're harvesting your first honey like this.
Fantastic. Honey McDonald is wondering if the bees have gone up to the Flow Super, does it automatically mean they have filled the brood box?
Not necessarily. It may just mean they've got a very busy colony and they need more room, so they're travelling up to the top. But it probably does mean they've drawn out all the comb. So if you've got all of these frames, whether there's foundation or not, in the brood box, if they're up in the top, then they've probably filled and used all of these frames, and now they're looking for more real estate in order to store their honey.
Nice. Tobias has built the hive and lives in Washington DC. How soon can I take it outside and when should they add the nuke? So they're in the US.
Yes.
Built the hive, got it all ready.
Perfect.
You're in the wrong season there.
So you can put it outside straight away because let's assume you put your finish on, but there's no need to until you put the bees in there. So what I suggest you do is get your nucleus. As you said, that's an easy way to start, and put that in a place where you want to situate your hive. And then on the next warm sunny day when you have time, you can then get in your bee suit, get out your smoker and move that nuke over, put the hive you've already assembled and gotten ready in the place where the nuke was, and then add your frames from the nuke to the brood box. Put the rest of the frames in to make sure your box is full of frames. You won't need the super yet, and the roof goes on top of your inner cover, on top of the brood box. Look after them and they will grow. And once they've filled out all of these frames, you can then go and add the super on top. So that's fantastic. You're getting started. The best of luck with the beekeeping season ahead.
Yeah. So can you please explain the pros and cons about the entrance reducer? Do we need to remove it on very hot days to help with ventilation, etc.? I'm not quite sure where Kane is calling in from.
Okay. So in this area, in the subtropics here, we don't usually use an entrance reducer. The main reason we use it is actually to close the hive if we're moving it. However, if you've got a very weak colony or you've got robbing happening in your apiary, then a good idea to reduce your entrance down to stop the robber bees coming and stealing honey from that hive and perhaps wrecking that colony. So the entrance reducer is good for stopping robbing, but also good if you're in a really cold area and you're wanting to limit ventilation. In that case, you would limit the ventilation at the back of the hive by turning our little ventilated cover up the other way so the vents are down, and you could put the entrance reducer on. The other reason you might like to put the entrance reducer on is if you've got wasps. Now we don't have them here, but in other parts of the world they have wasps that are called yellow jackets, which will get in your hive and actually kill the bees and eat bees. So you might like to put your entrance reducer on, which will allow your bees to really guard their entrance a lot better.
Right. So do you suggest a queen excluder between the brood box and the Flow Super? Melf Davey is saying sometimes I find it hard to get the bees to use the flow frames when I'm using the queen excluder.
That's a great question. So I've successfully used no queen excluder on a number of hives, and it seems to be very queen specific. I've found that if you don't use an excluder, your queen will either be a Flow Hive or Flow Frame egg layer or not. And if she's not, you're not seeing any larvae laid in the flow frames, then you can go ahead and use it without the excluder. I had a hive running for years like that, and one day I just happened to be there at the entrance watching while they dragged out the queen. 3 weeks later we had brood in the flow frames, and that just really showed that it was so queen specific. The new queen didn't mind laying in the flow frames, the old queen didn't lay in the flow frames. So you can go ahead and not use an excluder, but just check that you don't end up with eggs laid in your flow frames.
Great. Brendan's tuning in from Brisbane, just up the road, has a 10 frame hive and the super's filling up really quick. Wants to know what to look for with the need to split another brood box, because doesn't want the bees to swarm or for the brood box to be over full. So just wondering, what does he need to look out for in the brood box before maybe looking at taking another split?
Okay, great. You're taking splits and really thinking about what's happening with your hive. Well done. Now, what you're looking for is when you open the windows and you cannot see the comb because the bees are so crowded in there, and as well you've got bees building up at the front. Now, bees building up at the front will happen on a hot day anyway. This afternoon you'll see a lot of bees out the front, but it's not necessarily showing you've got too many bees for your hive unless you pair that up with the view through the window. If you can't see the comb there and there's bees building up at the entrance, then your hive is overflowing with bees and they could do with more room, or as you say, you could take a split to reduce the numbers in the hive. So they're the two things you mainly look out for, and especially in the springtime. If you're in the early spring and they're building up, that's when you're likely to get swarms. You can get swarms later on, but it's less likely. So you might decide that it's unlikely they're going to swarm, and you're happy for them to be a bit crowded through the summertime and a bit of a bee beard happening at the front. However, if you want to be on the safe side and make sure you don't lose half your bees, go ahead and take a split or add another brood box or another super to give them more room.
Nice. Matthew's tuning in from the Bow Desert in Queensland. Just wondering, with this high humidity and heat, would you recommend giving bees more ventilation in the roof?
Not in the roof. Now, my experience is if you give top vents, then the bees just block them up. They don't want that. What they want is to be able to control the environment in their hive. And they do that by fanning air up and down the hive and out the entrance or out the screen bottom. If you then go and put vents up the top, they can't control it anymore. Warm air rises, it goes up and goes out, and they've lost that warm air when they might have wanted it that night. So they go ahead and they block up vents at the top with propolis. Now, it's up to you. Some beekeepers swear by ventilation on the top, but I just find it doesn't help.
Fantastic. Sorry, seeds. Flick back over there.
If you want to give them a lot of ventilation, you can pull the tray out altogether, and then they've got a huge amount of ventilation from the bottom up through the screen bottom board.
Nice. Paul's saying Paul's got 2 brood boxes and a super. Just wondering, when they've taken the last of the honey for the season, should they remove the super so there is less room for the bees in winter and just leave the 2 brood boxes?
That is a common practice if you've got a long cold winter ahead, is to reduce the size of your hive and take one or more of your supers off and reduce it to 1 or 2 boxes down the bottom. So you can go ahead and do that, harvest the honey, take the super away. Ideally keep it in a cold area where you're not going to get mould and fermentation happening on your frames if there is a bit of honey left. You want to keep it away from bees. And if you've got a deep freeze, put it in there. That's a great way to keep it perfectly for the next season, or if it's generally cold anyway where you are, you can just keep it away from vermin and bees, and that way it'll be ready to go for next time you want to put it on your hive. Other people like to leave it on the hive and let the bees consume the last honey out of the frames over the winter. And typically if you've got a setup just like this in a cold area, look, we've got one bee coming to find the honey finally, and that's a question we often get is, won't the bees come for the honey? The answer is yes, they do sometimes. And if they do, it's a good idea to cover the jar. Look at that. No. We've got a full jar of honey there. We might just finish up, but one of the things I was just saying is you can remove the excluder for those cold winters, which allows the bee ball to move up through the hive and consume the honey in the flow frames, and without leaving the queen left behind, because if she's left behind she might perish. So if you leave the super on, long cold winter ahead, take the excluder out, or otherwise take the super off and store it in a ideally cool place away from vermin. We might finish off this harvest now. Thank you so much for all of your great questions. We've got time for a couple more. I'll just show Nina how to finish off the harvest and what goes on in the hive. So what you want to do is pick the top slot there, perfect. And now push it all the way till you feel it stop at the back. That's it, perfect. Now go to a 90-degree angle, that's it, and leave it there for a minute or two while you pack up other things, and that way all of the frame parts will push back down into their correct position. If you just do a little quick close, you might find they bounce back up. They'll cause problems down later, like spillage in the hive when you've got wax build up in these areas here. If you have a look here, what's happened is beneath their feet, the comb has now formed hexagons again, ready for them to rip off that capping, recycle the wax up all the frame parts, rebuild the little bridges, and fill those cells with nectar again, and the whole process starts again. Now you can take this tube out, and you can either enjoy the spoils by getting a taste of that, but what you want to do is then put this little cap in here, and the remaining honey will dribble back through that leak back point we spoke about earlier, and you can, if you have a close look, you'll even see the bees' tongues licking up into the trough zone there, cleaning up the last remaining bits of honey, which bees are very good at. I've got a beautiful jar of honey here that we can now take up to enjoy with the team. Well done.
Nice work, Nina.
And that's really the only cleanup you have to do, which is very, very different to conventional harvesting, where you've got extractors to clean, buckets to clean, sieves to clean, a bench covered in honey and wax where you've been decapping, a decapping knife to clean, tubs to clean up, and everything like that. So it's such a joy to harvest in this way, where you can simply turn a handle and fill up your jar of honey. Yum. Time for one last question.
Okay, this is a good one. Justin's in Ballarat and Victoria here. Food box. So they're in Ballarat, Victoria.
No, I don't think so at all. We're here in the hottest part of summer, and you'll find your bees will have plenty to forage on in Ballarat. So I think go ahead and get your colony started. Even if they only fill up the bottom box, you'll still give them a head start for next year. But you might even find, if there's a lot of forage around, that they will get time to store some honey for you as well. Thank you very much for tuning in and all of your fantastic questions. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about next week. We're here each week to answer your questions, to help you get started in beekeeping. If you've got answers to other people's questions, it's fantastic to see you chiming in with your knowledge and helping other people out. It's a great community of global beekeepers, and it's just an amazing thing to have watched that blossom over the last 8 years, and to be still here helping answer your questions as you get started in the fascinating world of bees.